neurologist, she's a natural MD, and public health specialist, and she's on a mission to show that what's good for animals is also good for humans. So I'll let her talk about herself. There's more information on her bio, but please join me in giving her a round of applause.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay, so before I get started, I have to say this. I work for the Food and Drug Administration, and I'm a lieutenant commander in the Public Health Service, so I always have to give the obligatory disclaimer that what I say here are my opinions and my opinions only, and they don't represent the U.S. government's, although they should. All right, so picture this. The year is 1983. My family and I are sitting around the dinner table discussing different topics. So here's my family. Those are my two parents, thinking they were cool looking. In the other photo at the two ends are my two younger sisters. The guy with the winning hairstyle is my brother, and the brooding, tomboyish looking one in the middle is me. Well, somehow the topic had turned to this: should we eat animals? And we discussed it, and we had decided that since we eat plants which are living, and since humans have been eating animals for what seems like forever, that eating animals was a natural and right thing to do. I'm sure many of you have heard or even made the same arguments. So we patted ourselves on our back for our rational decision-making, and we kept on eating animals. And the truth is, we really didn't know anything about the topic except what we discussed at the table. We were living in lovely, lovely ignorant bliss. Enough ignorant bliss that we actually thought that this was a good look. Although I will say that those posters were pretty cool. All right, so 4 years, shaved mustaches, and plucked eyebrows later, we are at the dinner table again, and my mother announces that she's no longer serving meat in the house. My family agrees on the spot. What do you think happened in just 4 years that caused such a drastic turnaround in our view? Well, this happened. We adopted a little kitten named Pebbles, and she became the love of our lives. And this happened. As a companion for Pebbles, we adopted Louie, who also became the love of our lives. These were the first animals we ever adopted. Now, you have to know a little bit about my family to understand why this was so remarkable, especially for my father. My father grew up in a small rural village in Pakistan that I was fortunate to see and visit, but unfortunately, that village, over there, they consider animals dirty creatures who are meant to be kept separate from humans. Pakistanis are certainly not known as being vegetarians. In fact, they ridicule vegetarians. When my brother was a teenager, he shot BB guns at our neighbor's cats. Fortunately, he was a bad shot. And when my sisters and I were little, we were taught by our friends, and we actually believed that all black cats are evil. All of this changed after Louie and Pebbles entered our lives. My previously animal-loathing father became an absolute softie, and both of my parents quickly came to prefer the company of our cats over the company of the 3 teenage daughters and their 22-year-old son, who's still living at home with no plans for leaving. So seeing our cats as individuals with their own personalities, their own likes and dislikes, helped us to see all other animals as individuals as well. We came to see all animals, including those raised for food, not as what, but as who. So through our cats, my family developed a new relationship with all animals, a relationship that was certainly much better for the animals. But here's the best thing. This new relationship was also much better for us. Now, more than 20 years later, by adopting a vegan way of eating, my family is much healthier. All 4 of my father's brothers died from heart disease and stroke in their 50s and 60s. My father is 78 years old and he's still going strong. My mother is 70 years old, but she has the looks and energy of someone much younger. And my sister's debilitating migraines stopped after she cut out dairy. Now, seeing the benefits that my family experienced caused me to ask an even larger question. Do we, as a society, benefit from treating animals with basic kindness and respect? And I know many of you are here because you're already vegetarian or vegan, Some of you may be here because you're curious about it. And some of you may be here because you truly care about the suffering of animals. And I bet at some point you have been asked this question: how can you care about animals when so many humans are suffering? And you probably found yourself having to defend your concern for animals, right? See, there's this tendency to think that we're in some sort of competition with animals, that we can either protect humans from harm or animals. You may have heard this phrase, it's your dog or your child. In other words, we've been led to believe that we have to make a choice. It's us or the animals. But over the course of my career in medicine and public health, I found that we are not in competition with animals. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Our fates are shared with those with animals. What I have found is this: it's not us or them, it's us and them. When we save animals, we save ourselves. And when we hurt animals, we hurt ourselves too. In fact, many of our most urgent public health threats are connected with the way we treat animals. Every day, thousands of animals are experimented on in windowless basement laboratories, but the evidence shows that these experiments are outdated and actually prevent us from finding the cures we so desperately seek. Every week, millions of animals are ripped from their habitat to be shipped around the globe as exotic pets, for meat, fur, or for circuses. But we know that this trade in animals is the reason why we have HIV, SARS, and Ebola. And every year, billions of animals are killed for our consumption. But we discovered that this animal industry contributes more to greenhouse gases than all the world's planes, trains, and automobiles combined. Every human life is now impacted by the way we treat animals. And nowhere is this more apparent than our eating habits. Most of us here are going to die from a chronic disease. Heart disease and stroke make up the majority of deaths in the US and worldwide. Entire families are dying from these diseases. But we're not dying because we inherited our mother's DNA. No, we're dying because we inherited our mother's cookbook. Except now we eat more animals than our parents ever did. Each American will eat about 7,000 animals in his or her lifetime. And for every human on the planet, there are more than 10 animals raised and killed for food at any given time. So 10 farmed animals for every human. And we thought human overpopulation was a problem. Now that is a massive, massive industry. The days of family farms are long gone. And in their place, we have factory farms. Chickens, pigs, and turkeys now live here. These animals are so jam-packed into these farms that they are literally lying in their own waste, and fans have to circulate the air to keep these animals from suffocating. These animals are constantly breathing in fecal matter, ammonia from their urine, and pathogens that are circulating in the air. Factory farms are filthy, filthy places. If you were to spend just 2 hours inside one of these farms, your lungs and eyes would burn from the stench of urine. That's just 2 hours. Imagine for a moment what it must be like for the animals who have to live their entire lives here. And by causing animals to suffer, we cause ourselves to suffer. Our high consumption of animal products is killing us. We are getting chronic illnesses at younger and younger ages than our parents ever did. Now, 1 in 3 of us between the ages of 40 and 60 have heart disease. Most of us don't even know it. And 1 American dies from a stroke every 4 minutes. And if the idea of dying from these diseases doesn't scare you, the idea of living with these diseases should. As a neurologist, I treated a lot of patients who had stroke. And let me tell you, you do not want to have a stroke. You do not want to live the remainder of your life half paralyzed and having someone else have to feed you and take care of you. Animal products are the main source of saturated fats and the only source of cholesterol in our food. A Harvard study projects that by 2050, more than half of Americans will be obese. Not overweight, obese. And that was the best case scenario. Now, animal products aren't the only causes of these chronic illnesses, but we know without a doubt that animal products are certainly one of the main causes. Now, this is such a waste. We know how to prevent these illnesses. If we saved animals, we save ourselves too. Now, after chronic diseases, infectious diseases are most likely to kill us. We can get infectious diseases from factory farms in three main ways: by eating animals and their products, by contamination of the environment, and by direct release of pathogens into the human population. You see, factory farms are almost as good at producing new pathogens as they are at churning out cheap animal products. When you eat meat, eggs, or dairy, you are eating something that is teeming with bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella. And the very drugs we rely on to combat these bacteria are being pumped into these animals. In the 1970s, it was found that by feeding animals in factory farms low and continuous levels of antibiotics, they were able to help the animals grow and survive just long enough to make a profit. The conditions are so bad, factory farms really depend on using antibiotics. That's how they keep the animals alive. And this has created superbugs on the farm, bacteria that our antibiotics can no longer fight. A University of Minnesota study found harmful bacteria in 2/3 of beef and pork and in 97% of the chicken sold in our grocery stores. What's more, most of the E. coli was resistant to at least one antibiotic. And just a few weeks ago, Consumer Reports announced a similar finding. In their survey of ground beef sold in 26 cities throughout the country, they found bacteria in every single sample. Now, these bacteria live in the intestinal tracts of animals. They are shed in their feces. So just think about this. When your meat's contaminated with E. coli or Salmonella, it's also contaminated with feces. It's not a pretty picture. Multiple studies have found antibiotic-resistant bacteria thriving in animal products long after they are sold and nicely packaged for our grocery store. Now, you know all the care you take in buying and preparing your food? Well, your food was contaminated long before you brought it home. Factory farms are filthy places, and because the animals are so miserable and so stressed, their immune systems are down. And that makes factory farms perfect breeding grounds for infectious diseases. And then at the end of their lives, when animals are slaughtered, they are so terrified that they frequently soil themselves and cross-contaminate other carcasses down the processing line. In the U.S., we slaughter 1 million animals an hour. Can you imagine that? We kill 1 million animals an hour. Do you honestly think that a few hundred inspection officers, at the most, throughout the country, quickly glancing at these carcasses as they whiz by on the slaughter line is going to protect you? Of course not. We need to protect ourselves. And we can protect ourselves if we change our relationship with animals. If, though, we don't make that change, we're going to continue to hurt ourselves. Because besides becoming infected by directly eating animals and their products, we can catch infectious diseases when the manure from factory farms are spread over our crops. Now, manure used to be a good thing. In the past, we could take our time, bake manure in the sun, to kill off the bacteria and safely use it to nourish our crops. But now we have too much of it, and we have to find ways to get rid of it fast. A farm of 5,000 pigs produces as much manure as a city of 50,000 people. So the agribusiness solution is to hold this manure in cesspools the size of large ponds that they call lagoons, or to spray it as a liquid sludge over our crops. And this liquid, gooey manure provides a nice, cozy environment for bacteria to thrive. Remember, most of the bacteria that cause foodborne illnesses are intestinal bacteria. They live in the intestinal tracts of humans and other animals. Plants don't have intestines. They don't naturally carry these bacteria. But they can become contaminated when fresh liquid manure is spread over our fields. This year, 1 in 6 of us will get a foodborne illness. Now, we can largely prevent this if we considered the lives of animals. If, though, we continue to ignore the plight of animals, we may have an even deadlier problem on our hands. Now, our greatest danger may not be bacteria like E. coli or Salmonella, but new viruses that can cause pandemics. And here we are mostly concerned about the influenza A virus. Unlike other types of influenza virus, well, let me say there are 3 types of influenza viruses. There's influenza C, which doesn't really cause much of a problem. Influenza B, which causes the seasonal flus we get each year. But unlike unlike B or C, influenza A can be carried by a wide range of species in addition to humans. Now, for this reason, influenza A viruses are extremely difficult to track, predict, and contain. The worst pandemic in history occurred just as World War I was winding down. The 1918 influenza A virus killed more people in 25 weeks than AIDS has killed in 25 years. Now, for good reason, we public health folks call it the mother of all pandemics. Now, the virus was able to take hold and spread quickly among the soldiers who were miserable and crowded in the muddy trenches. Like factory farms, the trenches became breeding grounds for new infectious diseases. And actually, the influenza virus had remained quite stable for a number of years after World War I. Except in the past few decades, it's been rapidly mutating. Why? Because of factory farms. Influenza A viruses all originate from wild aquatic birds, so like wild ducks or geese. But we rarely ever become sick from direct contact with these animals. Something has to happen to the virus to allow it to cause harm to us. And this is where animal agriculture comes into play. Now, despite all attempts to keep infectious diseases out, an influenza virus can easily enter a chicken or a turkey factory farm. And once the virus enters a bird factory farm, it can quickly transform from a mild virus into a very deadly one. And what's more, pigs are virus mixing vessels. Pigs can carry influenza viruses from other pigs, from birds, and from humans. And if the situation is right, or wrong, depending on how we want to look at it, a virus can emerge that can spread easily among people. Now, I know we constantly hear about the new swine and bird flu viruses that get in the news. It causes a bit of a panic, and then our worst case scenarios never end up happening, and then it disappears from the news. And I know, or at least some of you may have heard about the recent bird flu epidemic that swept across the chicken farms in the US this past summer. Hundreds of thousands of birds were killed by being foamed to death. We foamed them to death. Despite the tragedy for the birds, we humans, have been incredibly lucky so far. If you were to catch one of the more common bird flus, you would have only a 40% chance of surviving. Now that's with all our medical technology and drugs. 40% chance of surviving. Now that is a deadly, deadly virus. Fortunately, though, bird flu has not been very contagious among humans. Swine flu is contagious among humans, but has not been very deadly so far. Because of the crowded conditions in a factory farm, a bird or swine flu could spread from animal to animal like wildfire. Like the trenches of World War I, factory farms are incubators for the virus. Except now, instead of having sick soldiers by the thousands unable to escape the virus, we have sick animals by the billions. See, the poor animals on these farms are like nightclubs for viruses. In them, different viruses can get together, exchange greetings, and swap genetic material. And each time a virus passes on to another animal, it can mutate into an even deadlier form. Now, despite how deadly it was, the 1918 virus still killed less than 5% of people who were infected. So what do you think would happen if a bird flu that killed 60% of people combined with a swine flu that spread fast? Or what would happen if Ebola became airborne? We normally catch Ebola when we hunt, butcher, and eat wild animals like wild pigs, monkeys, and fruit bats from the African bush. And while this bushmeat trade has existed for a long time, it's been drastically ramped up in recent years. Now, as we clear-cut the forest for the logging industry and create new pig farms, we make access to wild animals and the viruses they carry, like Ebola, easier than ever before. And as we ship these animals around the globe for the wildlife trade, we're also shipping their viruses. Remember the Ebola scare we had recently? Well, our government was so scared that it rapidly and frantically mounted a national Ebola response. As a lieutenant commander in the Public Health Service, I helped play a role in our national Ebola response. The Ebola strain that caused an epidemic in Western Africa recently was spread through bodily fluids. So fortunately, it was never very contagious. But a possible airborne Ebola has been found circulating among pigs in farms in the Philippines. Let me tell you, you guys know, right? I can hear it. That is bad, bad news. Because of factory farms, it is just a matter of time before a new virus emerges that has the right combination to be both deadly and contagious. And this time, we're going to find ourselves face to face with the mother-in-law of all pandemics. Okay, so I told you guys the bad news. As long as we continue to ignore how animals are treated, we remain trapped in this never-ending cycle, where the suffering we cause animals comes back and causes our own suffering. And rather than protecting us, our tax dollars are paying for the very industries that are killing us. Most of our farm subsidies pays for our factory farming and its feed crops. But you know, of course I'm going to be up here to tell you that there is good news, and you guys know it. None of this has to happen. Remember that old choice between helping animals or humans? Well, it's wrong. Not only can we save ourselves and other animals, but in order to save ourselves, we have to save animals too. In order to protect ourselves, we have to change our relationship with animals. And the best part about this is that we don't have to wait for our government to do the right thing. We each have the power in our own hands to make this change, and it all comes down to one thing. Just choose one plate of food over another. That's it. One plate of food over another. That was Ebola. By simply choosing the plate full of delicious vegan food over that plate full of that nasty bacteria and fecal-ridden meat, eggs, and dairy, you will single-handedly help prevent a pandemic, and you'll help protect the environment, and you'll protect yourself from a stroke, and you will lose weight, and you will save thousands of animals from a lifetime of suffering and a horrendous, horrendous death. Now just think about this. How often in life are we given the opportunity to make such a tremendous impact with so little effort? So we have a new choice in front of us. Do we continue in this backward, never-ending loop where the suffering we cause animals causes our own suffering? Or do we stop and change course in the forward direction and save animals and save ourselves? So imagine for a moment if we saw the destinies of humans and animals as shared. Imagine how much we could accomplish if we saw animals not as what, but as who. And imagine how much brighter the future would be for all of us if we finally recognize that we are all, humans and animals, in it together. Thank you guys very much. I am happy to take any questions. Yes?
Do you think this message to schools, like elementary schools, middle schools?
Oh, medical schools and public health schools? No.
No, not public schools.
Oh.
Children's schools, elementary school, middle school, high school.
I don't think this particular message is getting out to children at that age. I don't know if it's more complicated than what they can understand. I know that there is a program called Humane Education that's trying to teach kids empathy by having contact with other animals. So I think it's more of a general approach. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes.
How are you able to bring this message and make changes in the government?
So the question was that since I work for the government, how am I able to make changes within government? The question is, so far, not much. Government, I have to tell you, I don't think change happens mostly because people change. I think, not in government. I think change happens because the old guard dies and it's replaced by new, younger folks. New folks with newer ideas and who've been raised in an atmosphere where compassion for animals is not considered something alien. The current folks we have in government are largely not very sympathetic to the plight of animals and just don't get that connection. Although, this is one of the things that I am trying to do. I am trying to change this. Any other questions? Yeah, all the way back there? I think the question was, are there factory farms in Paris? Oh. For like the UN World Summit on Environmental Changes, are there any discussion about animal agriculture? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know at all. As you guys probably know, this whole connection between animal agriculture and the environment has been something that we've been trying to make so apparent for a long time. And people just ignored it. And only now, though, are some people actually starting to take up and realize that connection. We want to say, we've been right, we've been telling you this all along. But there was a long article in CNN recently that did talk about the contribution of beef, raising cattle for beef with the environmental changes. It made it seem like eating chicken and pork was a lot better. And while for environmental reasons they are better in some ways, maybe for greenhouse gases, they're certainly not better in other ways, like the pollution of our lakes and streams and that sort of thing. But the word is getting out there. Yeah?
My understanding is the Greens have played political advancements in other first world countries. They have the same problem with factory farms.
You're asking about in the situation in other countries, in first world countries? I honestly, I don't know. I don't know what their situation is with the factory farming. I mean, I think that overall they might be a little bit more progressive than we are here in the United States, but I can't really answer that question. Yep.
I was so surprised with, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth that there was no mention of factory farming. What would you say are the main reasons of government? Is it the lobbies, or what do you think that keeps this topic?
So the first comment was you're surprised that Al Gore didn't make this connection between animal agriculture and the environment in his movie Inconvenient Truth. Al Gore is now vegan. Yes, so it took a long time, but he is a vegan now. And the second question was, why are governments so reluctant to change? I think the types of people who go into government, I think it says something about the types of people who go into government who are a bit more stuck in their ways. They're used to having things the way it is. And the truth is that the folks in government are just like every other human being on this planet. They eat meat. They eat animals, most of them do. So it's just as hard to convince them as it is to convince your brother or your sister, who may be the meat eater in the family, for example. So they're personally invested in eating animals because they want to eat animals. So I think that it's hard for them to make that connection as well, just like any other human being. Yeah?
What would you, not that I would make this point, but what would you say or what happens to somebody who says that the answer to what you brought up here is free range?
Right. So the question was, what would I say if someone said the answer is free range or small farm? There is no way we can have free range animals, and I mean really, truly free range, not the labeling that we have now where it really doesn't mean free range, but to really have animals free ranged to accommodate the appetite for animal products and the number of people on this planet right now. I think Hope Bahonek, I don't know if I pronounced her name right, but she just gave a really good talk earlier on. She said it would take 5 planet Earths to accommodate all those free-range animals, the ones that we have in factory farm or intensive farming now. We just don't have the resources. It's only something that would work for a few privileged elite folks.
But do you think it would be better sometimes the way they go?
Oh, would free range be better for disease issues? Yeah, it really depend. I mean, yes, in many ways it would certainly be better for controlling diseases. I mean, when you're going to put any population of any animal, whether it's human beings crowded into the slums of a city or animals crowded into the slums of a factory farm, you're making it much easier for pathogens to spread from one to the other. So if you have more space between the individuals, that certainly makes it much more difficult for pathogens to spread. But to really answer that question, I think you would have to really know the conditions of we're talking about, free range. I don't know what free range animals how we would be able to have them in such an environment that it's sustainable, in addition to having it sustainable not only for the land but for us. Yeah.
I've been a vegetarian almost 11 years and a vegan about a year. The specific question is that I'm 64. I'm going to go for a colonoscopy. And some people said I don't need it, and some think I do. So I'm not sure. What was your opinion about that?
Oh well, I can't give personal medical advice. You know that. I mean, in general, most colon cancer is. We have a lot of colon cancer in this country. And I will tell you this, there is a very strong link between colon cancer and the eating of meat. It is so strong. It's one of the strongest links we have between the disease and our dietary habits. So, I mean, honestly, I can't give you a personal recommendation. I mean, I think that in general, when we have these screening guidelines, they're geared towards the general population. So we have a general population that's very overweight, very obese, has incredibly poor dietary habits. And colon screening is probably the one thing that saves lives for many of these folks. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, about the Filipino Ebola virus. Is it was there any indication that was being transferred to human beings? And then two, is the government focusing on this as a real potential problem and whether they intending to do it?
Okay, so the question was about the Ebola virus circulating among pig farms in the Philippines. Is there a chance for that to become contagious or to infect humans and become contagious among humans? And the second question was, what's the government doing about it, if anything? Well, the answer to the second question is very easy. The government's not doing anything. All right. There were some folks at the CDC, I think, who were part of the study and looked and found the Ebola, but I don't think there is. I found out about this. Look, I work in the Office of Counterterrorism and Emerging Threats of the Food and Drug Administration. What we do is prepare for emerging infectious diseases like Ebola. Not once has there ever been any discussion about this. Not once. So it's really not something, because people don't want to think too much about what it means for what they have to do and what changes they have to make. If our factory farming and the way we're treating animals and the whole animal industry and the shipping of animals around the globe is contributing to the transformation of Ebola and the spread of it, well, that's really not something our government, unfortunately, really wants to tackle just yet. They'd rather focus on the other end of it, which is how can we treat people once they get the disease, not how can we prevent it. No, we don't really look at the root causes of these diseases, unfortunately. Now, the first question. So when the scientists did an analysis of the Ebola virus that was found in these pigs, what they found was that it recognized receptors in the noses of both pigs and humans. So what that means is that it does recognize human nasal receptors. Note that our nose is one of the main ways that we transfer influenza to each other, right? We sneeze and all these kinds of things, and that's how we pass on the virus. So that's very, very dangerous. So yeah, there is a real potential there for it to spread into the human population. Yeah. Yeah.
I've heard earlier that about 10% of millennials were vegetarian now.
Can you say that again?
I think 10% of millennials are vegetarian now. I've heard that before. What do you think that is? Nothing really happening here.
You're saying 10% of millennials are vegetarians? I haven't heard that, but I'll take your word for it if you say that's true. I mean, I think the younger population are just growing up with more animals around them, right? So, first of all, we have more companion animals now, and we think differently about our companion animals than my parents' generation did, right? In the past, dogs were kept outdoors in dog houses and things like that. Cats were, largely outdoor animals. But now we've really changed our relationship with these companion animals. And so the kids today are growing up with these new relationships. So I think they're more open. The other thing that I think that is helping us spread the word and helping to change the newer generations, the fact that we have the internet. When back in the 1980s, when we used to talk about, I followed, for example, the issue of animal experimentation since the 1980s, okay? And back then, for anyone to try to get the issue out into the general population, you had to go through the general media, right? And the media did not want to touch it. They didn't care. They didn't want to discuss animal experimentation, except for, some exceptions, of course. But now we have the internet. We have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have all these other things. We don't need the media. We can go directly to each other and spread the word. We can show the videos. We can, show lectures like these. People are getting to this information more directly. And I really believe that's making a change. In fact, there's the Gallup poll that's done every several years that focuses even on just animal experimentation. And what they found was that the number of people who are opposed to animal experimentation is higher now than ever before. And among the youngest people, the young between 20 and 30, we now have a majority of people who are opposed to animal experimentation. Never had that before. So that's one issue, and I think the same can be said about animal agriculture, veganism, and so many other issues, is that really they're just so much more exposed because we have so many ways to expose people to these points. Any other questions? Yeah?
You talked about the connection, it being so strong between colon cancer and eating animal products. I'm curious if there's also a strong connection between eating animal products and breast cancer, which also seems to be very common.
Yeah, so the question is there a link between eating animal products and breast cancer? The strongest link is actually with dairy products and breast cancer. There's a lot of studies that have shown a very strong link between dairy and breast cancer, and I don't remember what it was. about dairy. There was something about that it changed the estrogen profile or something. I don't remember the details, but there is a very strong link. It has not been proven proven to be as strong of a link as the link between meat and colon cancer. But but the fact that it hasn't been proven doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that we either don't have enough studies or we don't have as many good studies to really show that link that could be there. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you guys so much. I'm going to put my card out. If anyone wants to, I have a lot of resources on my website. I have a TEDx talk, like you said. That's really a shortened version of this if you want to try to convince someone and want to send it to a friend. I have resources about all the issues I touched upon, animal experimentation, vegetarian veganism, and the wildlife trade, and how it impacts our health. Okay? Thanks, everyone.